Chris Eubank Jr. St. George Grove.
Does Chris Eubank Jr. believe in his own chin a little bit too much going into this World Boxing Super Series Super Middleweight semi-final on Saturday against George Groves? Eubank Jr. has admitted that Groves is going to be the hardest puncher that he's ever faced in a professional boxing ring. And if we look at Chris Eubank Jr.'s past fights, on one hand, he's had fights like, for example, Spike O'Sullivan, where he was very macho in the O'Sullivan fight and reckless, and there were moments there where he had his hands down by his sides and had no defense, standing right in front of Spike O'Sullivan, and was getting into these wild exchanges with him. He clearly wasn't worried about Spike O'Sullivan's power, and he was taking clean shots from Spike O'Sullivan bang on the chin. So on one hand we see that from Chris Eubank Jr., but on the other hand we see fights like he had against Nick Blackwell, where he was actually very defensively astute and aware and responsible, and he was doing a lot of ducking and diving, moving and sliding, and not allowing Nick Blackwell to have any free shots. And then there's kind of the middle ground, like when he fought Avni Yildirim in his last fight. The first couple rounds he was slipping and sliding, not allowing Yildirim to get any shots in, but then in the third round, when he finished the fight, he got into a pretty wild exchange with Yildirim. Now, Eubank Jr. said that he knew he had the faster hands than Yildirim. He obviously knew he could hurt him from the first round when he dropped him with an uppercut. So he was willing to take a calculated gamble and exchange with the guy in the belief that he'd be able to take Yildirim's shots, and he'd also be able to land his own that had hurt Yildirim, and he'd be able to land more frequently because he's faster. So therein lies the two contrasting approaches from Eubank Jr. And as I say, I guess the Yildirim is the one in the middle. Which one is he going to employ against George Groves? Does he have enough respect for George Groves' power? Remember, they sparred hundreds of rounds together. And there's actually an interesting article on the Boxing News website. Boxing News is a long-running boxing publication in the UK. I believe they're now only online. I don't think the Boxing News prints an actual paper publication anymore. But yeah, they're online. They have an online article where they interview Adam Booth. And Adam Booth used to train both George Groves and Chris Eubank Jr. at different times. He obviously only trained Eubank Jr. for one fight. It was the O'Sullivan fight. But he trained George Groves for several years. But even though he only trained Eubank Jr. for one fight, because he was Groves' trainer, he witnessed all those spars that Groves had with Eubank Jr. And interestingly, he said, well, first of all, he said all the spars were highly competitive and they were fantastic spars. But he also says that from what he can remember, the only time that anybody was noticeably hurt in those spars was in the last spar that those two fighters had with each other, and it was actually Eubank Jr. who Adam Booth claims was hurt, not George Groves. He says Eubank Jr. appeared to be stunned from a George Groves left hook, which is interesting as well because George Groves' left hook is not known as a big power punch for him. It's the right hand. But, you know, things happen in sparring. If you're doing hundreds of rounds with a guy, you could get hit with a shot that you don't see or what have you. So, yeah, I'm just interested to see what Chris Eubank Jr.'s mindset is going to be going into this fight. If he's going to be reckless, if he's going to respect Groves' power, and if so, how much will he respect it? Will he have to feel Groves' power first before he respects it? as I mentioned in previous videos, Groves hasn't dropped any of his last 4 opponents with headshots. And because of that, I believe that Eubank Jr. will be able to take Groves' power. Now, I'm not saying he can stand in front of Groves with his arms down and give Groves 5 free shots, because I'm sure Groves will knock him out if he does that. But in terms of taking 1 or 2 clean shots from Groves, I believe even if Eubank Jr. gets hurt or goes down, he'll be able to recover from taking 1 or 2 clean shots. And, as I've mentioned, Eubank Jr. is quite slippery when he wants to be. When he's under attack, he moves his head all over the place, and he's difficult to catch when he decides to go into that defensive posture. And because of that, I think that even if he gets hurt or in trouble against Groves, he'll manage to survive the situation. And yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see the power dynamic, how much George Groves' power comes into this, and how much Chris Eubank Jr. believes in his chin. Is Eubank Jr. going to attempt to put his arms up and walk straight forward against George Groves? Or is he going to try and be a bit cute about it? And in those slow rounds, who's going to be winning the slow rounds? I believe Groves is going to be the one who wins the slow rounds, at least early in the fight. Because I believe Groves is a superior long-range boxer to Chris Eubank Jr. At close range and mid-range, it's Eubank Jr. all day. But at long range, I believe Groves is superior. Chris Eubank Jr. can't throw, for example, a straight right hand at long range because he has elbow problems. That's why he always throws it with a bent arm or as an uppercut or as a hook. So, yeah, in those slow rounds, what tactics will Eubank Jr. choose to employ? Will he use his jab? There's an old adage in boxing that you can't hook with a hooker, but you can jab with a jabber. Or you shouldn't hook with a hooker, but you should jab with a jabber. And I've seen that many times in boxing. Lennox Lewis was a guy who made a career out of using his left jab effectively. It was his bread and butter. But when he fought people like Frank Bruno and Ray Mercer, they jabbed with him and they had a lot of success with their jabs. Even when David Haye fought Vladimir Klitschko, David Haye is not normally a jabber. But if you watch the Klitschko fight, there were moments in that fight where David Haye decided to sit down and try and box with Klitschko. Rather than using his normal ambush style, which he used for the majority of the fight, there were moments where he decided in spots to sit down and try box with Klitschko. And he actually had success with his jab, David Haye. Yeah, you go watch that fight again. Haye actually had success in spots in that fight using his jab. So again, you can jab with a jabber. Will Chris Eubank Jr. attempt to jab with George Groves? Eubank Jr.'s got a fast jab. I don't see his right hand from long range being effective against Groves. In fact, I would advise him not to throw it, because it will leave himself vulnerable to Groves' right hand, you know, if he's throwing it at long range. But the jab, maybe Eubank Jr. will try and jab with Groves. And it could be a revelation in this fight. It could be a success story which very few people predicted in terms of using his jab. How much will Groves use his jab? I'm of the belief that he won't use it as much against Eubank Jr. as he did against Murray and some of these slower, come forward type guys. But yeah, as I say, in the slower rounds, if Eubank Jr. don't use his jab to try and get close to Groves, what's he going to do? Just put his arms up, put his hands up and walk forward? Maybe he will. I've seen him do that in sparring. There's lots of sparring footage of Chris Eubank Jr. online where he's just putting his gloves up and walking sparring partners down and forcing them into the trenches. Will that be effective against George Groves? Will he get caught by big shots against Groves using those tactics? You let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Will Chris Eubank Jr. respect George Groves' power? Is he relying on his punch resistance too much? He believes he's got his dad's chin. He said this many times, I've got my father's chin. So punching power, I'm not worried about it. I can take whatever these guys are dishing out. Interesting. I guess we'll see, because it's not just about can Eubank Jr. take Groves' power. It's about can Groves' power affect the way Eubank Jr. fights the fight in a significant way. Will he get gun shy when he feels a few George Groves shots? Will he change his strategy? Let me know what you think in the comment section, people. It's happening. I'm out.